So I was talking to a friend the other day about the incredible legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, and they said, I don't envy Charles because those are some really large shoes to fill. And at the time I was like, yeah, definitely. But then as I was driving home, I kind of thought about it. And I thought about Queen Elizabeth's actual feet. And she was quite a small lady. So no doubt her shoes were probably proportionate. And that's when I realized Charles doesn't have large shoes to fill. He has very small ones to fill. He's going to have to try and fit into the small, humble, diminutive shoes of a true public servant. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. I'm pretty sure that most of us are familiar with the story of Cinderella, but you might not have necessarily thought about the metaphor of someone with a really inflated ego trying to squeeze that ego into the tiny shoes of someone who is actually quite humble. The quintessential servant leader who was epitomized by Jesus of Nazareth. Cinderella was the sort of character who clearly thought quite a lot about other people and other people's needs, and she never really complained about the work that she had to do. She took pride in her work. She worked hard and she worked diligently, and she did it in the service of others. Her only real aspirations were freedom and to be treated kindly in return. She aspired to love and to be loved. And in contrast to the stepmother and the stepsisters, she was not seeking power, she was not seeking aggrandizement, she was not seeking revenge. She was forgiving towards them rather than vindictive. And it was these qualities that made it impossible for other people to squeeze into her shoes. Not her actual shoe size. I have no doubt that being a teenager during World War II helped to shape the character of Princess Elizabeth. Rather than using her title and position to avoid all of the harsh realities of war or to keep herself safe while other people's lives were constantly at risk, instead she chose to serve. She remained in London during the Blitz, and she drove ambulances and worked as a mechanic. In the course of these duties, she probably would have seen some very horrific things. She would have seen people who were seriously injured or perhaps even killed. Like her parents as well, she would have had a look at the rubble of London, all of the homes and businesses and livelihoods that were utterly destroyed overnight. And just like other citizens at that time, she lived on the ration coupons, and she actually purchased her wedding dress using ration coupons. There's a rather heartwarming story that women from around the country sent Queen Elizabeth, or Princess Elizabeth at that time, their clothing ration stamps so that she could use it for her wedding dress, but she actually sent them back because it wasn't lawful to donate those things. But the government did give her a special grant to supplement the coupons that she herself had saved. As I mentioned before, Elizabeth was the epitome of a public servant. She never behaved as though she was entitled to anything. Instead, she believed in earning her position, and she worked diligently until the age of 96, up to 2 days before her passing. She also had the motto, never complain, never explain, which was part of maintaining the focus of public attention on the work that she did rather than her as a person. What work did she do? Well, part of it was giving recognition to others, like Sir Thomas More, who raised money for the health system. Because she never made her work about herself, it gave others a chance to be seen and honored. Another aspect of her job was to represent her country, as a stable and enduring figurehead who could be relied upon to demonstrate good character and good behavior. That's what the old-fashioned notion of nobility was about. It was about being noble and about being gentlemen and gentlewomen. Her position had no real political power, and she certainly wasn't allowed to make her sentiments known about politics. She was supposed to be neutral. So instead of wielding political and social power, instead she held the role of a diplomat. Diplomacy means maintaining good communication with people who you might otherwise disagree with. And in her role as a diplomat and a figurehead, Elizabeth maintained her dignity and her femininity. She felt no need to try and be a man in a role that was not necessarily a man's role, even though society, in a lot of ways, stipulated that it was predominantly a man's role. She remained feminine and ladylike, but that didn't mean that she was submissive. Nor was she interested in being pigeonholed by other people's notions of what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a female leader. The story of her driving a Saudi prince is a good example of subtle diplomacy and a form of old-fashioned feminism in action. The message that she sent to the Saudi prince was a subtle pushback against the notion that women are incompetent in some way, without overtly challenging him directly. After all, never complain, never explain. The Queen didn't lecture people, or preach, or label, or engage with petty spats. She was above it. Instead, she led by example, and she lived out her convictions and values. She didn't believe in lip service, she believed in action. Talk is cheap, and action speaks louder than words. So even though she demonstrated in a very roundabout and subtle but not subtle way that she did not agree with the Saudi prince, she didn't make it about him personally. She wasn't saying, "You are a misogynist." She wasn't wagging her finger at him or anything like that. And so she maintained the good relationship and communication with the leader of another country, whilst at the same time making her position clear. And that's why she was a brilliant and clever diplomat. Another role that the monarch of England or Britain or the United Kingdom, whichever one you want to call it, another role that they fulfill is to be the head or the figurehead of the Church of England or the Anglican Church. This is not a priestly role. The Archbishop of Canterbury fulfills that role, and of course all of the other priests and clergy within the church. Instead, the monarch can be thought of in the same biblical terms as the role of the kings of Israel, or perhaps the judges. And there is an example of a female judge in the Bible. In chapter 5 of the book of Judges, we have the story of Deborah, who was married, like Queen Elizabeth, and whose husband supported her role of leadership. And she judged the nation of Israel. She heard all of their needs and their grievances, and she facilitated justice. Queen Elizabeth was quite a devout woman, and she might not have talked about it a great deal or rammed it down other people's throats, but her faith formed a lot of the way that she performed her role. She saw herself as following in the footsteps of Christ, as being a faithful disciple of Jesus, which meant that she served all members of the community with respect and grace, regardless of where they came from or what they believed in. In the gospel accounts of the life of Jesus, he never seemed to turn anyone away, even if they were Roman or Greek or Samaritan. which went against a lot of the conventions of the Jewish religious leaders at the time. In Matthew chapter 8 and Luke chapter 10, we have examples of how Jesus related to people who came from different walks of life. Now, when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, pleading with him, saying, "Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed, dreadfully tormented." And Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." The centurion answered and said, "Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to those who followed, "Assuredly I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And I say to you that many will come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go your way, and as you have believed, so let it be done for you." And his servant was healed that same hour. Behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? What is your reading of it?" So he answered and said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "You have answered rightly. Do this, and you will live." But the lawyer, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Then Jesus answered and said, "A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come, I will repay you." So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And the lawyer said, "He who showed mercy on him." Then Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." As you can see in the story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus had a conversation with someone who said to him, "Who is my neighbor?" And I think the expected answer was people of the Jewish faith, because that was their background, that was their belief at the time. And Jesus actually subverted his expectations by saying that the person who performed the role of a neighbor was the one who had compassion on others, regardless of where that person came from. Likewise, Jesus said that the Roman centurion showed more faith than a lot of the so-called religious people of his day. Queen Elizabeth always recognized the neighborliness and the compassion within other people, regardless of what they believed in, because she recognized that we all share humanity, and that despite her position, she was not necessarily better than others. Because human beings are formed in the image of God, we all have the capacity to show love and compassion and mercy and forgiveness. And the Bible explicitly says that God doesn't really look at the outward appearances of people. He looks at what's going on with them internally. For God sees not as humans see. People look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. The Queen seemed to show the same sort of respect to everyone, whether they held a lofty position somewhere or were very ordinary people. And that was part of how she demonstrated her faith and carried out her duty as a figurehead for the Church of England. Because of all of these qualities, I am fairly confident that Queen Elizabeth II will hear those words which all Christians long to hear. "Well done, good and faithful servant, enter into your Lord's rest. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up and share it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.